Picture this. It's 1972, and you've got two men sitting in a small conference room in California, debating whether to spend $25 million on a candy company. Now, one of these guys is Warren Buffett, and he's doing what Warren does, rapid mental calculations in his head. And Warren is concerned because he's about to pay far, far more than what he typically does for what is really a regional chocolate business. Nothing more, nothing less. But then there's this other guy, Charlie Munger. And Charlie leans back and he says something that's going to fundamentally reshape how the entire world thinks about investing. He says, Warren, forget the numbers for a moment. This isn't what about sees is worth today. This is about what it can become. And that single conversation, it doesn't just lead to one of the most profitable acquisitions in business history. And this is where it gets crazy. It marks the exact moment when value investing evolves from hunting for statistical bargains to recognizing the extraordinary power of quality businesses that can compound cash flow for years and years and years. The business we're talking about is See's Candies, and it went on to generate over $2 billion in profits for Berkshire Hathaway. But that's not even the most important part. What's fascinating is that this is the moment that teaches Warren and Charlie the principles that they'd use to build the single most iconic investment firm in the world. But here's why I want to talk to you about Charlie today. Charlie wasn't supposed to be in that room at all. By conventional measures, this guy should have remained a successful lawyer in Los Angeles. That's it. End of story. Yet through a series of pivotal decisions, and I'm talking about decisions that were forged in adversity that would have broken most people, he becomes the intellectual architect behind Berkshire's transformation. And not just that, but in my opinion, history's most influential investor. And it's not just me that thinks this, because you know what Warren Buffett once said about Charlie? He said, Charlie is the architect of Berkshire's philosophy, and I am just the general contractor. So think about that for a moment. You have who the world believes to be the most famous investor of all time telling you that he's not the star here. It is under the radar partner. Yet Charlie's story, it remains largely untold. He's been overshadowed by his more famous partner, despite being, and I truly believe this, in many ways the more impressive of the two. But today, we're going to change that. This is going to be fascinating. Let's dive in. Welcome to Inflection Moments. I'm David Franklin, and you and I are about to dive into something fascinating. You know that moment when everything changes for an entrepreneur? When one decision, one pivot, one breakthrough suddenly shifts their entire trajectory. That's what we're hunting for today. If you're building something, if you're that founder grinding it out, making those impossible decisions that keep you up at night, this episode is for you. Because today, we're going inside the mind of one of the most successful entrepreneurs in history to uncover the exact moments that transformed their journey from ordinary to extraordinary. Here's what we're doing. We're dissecting the 5 most pivotal inflection points in their career, but more importantly, we're uncovering the strategic thinking behind each decision, the kind of insight that separates the builders from the dreamers. Ready? Let's get started. Full disclosure here, I really don't have singular role models in life, but if I did, I would tell you that it's Charlie Munger. Despite being fortunate enough to receive a great education growing up, I can tell you that nobody has taught me more about how to understand the world than Charlie. Because this guy is the emperor of mental models and pattern recognition in investing, in business, and in human psychology. The only other person I've studied who comes close to having such a ferocious appetite for knowledge is Bill Gates, who, spoiler alert, we'll be doing an episode on him some point too. And through his command of every corner of the academic library, Charlie has been able to stitch together this tapestry of knowledge about human behavior that he can apply to almost any situation like a Swiss Army knife. With this in mind, please promise me something. You need to listen to one of the most impactful speeches you will ever here. It's a masterclass in understanding psychological biases and mental models. It's called The Psychology of Human Misjudgment. It's a speech that he gives to Harvard Business School students in 1995 and something you should permanently bookmark in your YouTube account. The amount of wisdom in there and his command of the subject matter is incredible. And I'm sure that at some point I'll do an episode just dedicated to that speech alone, because it's the kind of wisdom that makes you want to tattoo some of Charlie's ideas right into your brain. Only so much of his lessons can be captured in this episode, so take this as a disclosure that we're just exploring the tip of the iceberg today. First, we'll look at how a 5-year-old's observations during America's worst economic crisis teach him the principles of capital allocation and supporting others. This is where Charlie learns that crisis reveals character and how to deploy resources when everyone else is paralyzed by fear. Second is how he leverages pure intellectual horsepower to gain admission to Harvard Law School without an undergraduate degree. The guy literally convinces Harvard to waive their requirements, and in doing so, it establishes a pattern of unconventional problem solving that would serve him for decades. Third is how his personal tragedy, divorce, bankruptcy, and his young son's death from leukemia become the foundation for his philosophy of rational decision-making under extreme stress. At 31 years old, Charlie was divorced, broke, and burying his 9-year-old son. Most people would have been destroyed. Fourth is how he pioneers a wealth-building strategy that turns small amounts of capital and huge brain power into millions through real estate development. We're talking 400% returns, not through luck, but through systems-based thinking. And finally is how his insight about quality businesses fundamentally changed investing forever. The Seize Candies decision didn't just make billions, it rewrites and becomes the playbook for how the smartest investors think about value today. Each of these moments reveals something crucial about how extraordinary success really happens. And here's what I found most interesting in my research. It's not through avoiding failure. It's through developing systems that turn the inevitable setbacks into your biggest advantages. By the end of today's conversation, you're going to understand the frameworks that Charlie develops through these pivotal experiences. Sadly, Charlie passed away in November 2023, just a month shy of turning 100 years old. He was as sharp as a tack, even into his late 90s. And so to use one of Charlie's unforgettable one-liners, you need to make friends with the eminent dead for the secrets of worldly wisdom. And that's what today's episode is all about. So let's start where it all began, with a 5-year-old boy watching his grandfather make a decision that would save an entire family during America's darkest economic hour. Okay, let's dive into the first inflection point. It's January 1st, 1924, and Charlie enters the world in Omaha, Nebraska, born into what's about to become one of America's most formative decades. His grandfather, Thomas Munger, is a distinguished federal judge and a state representative, and his father, Alfred Munger, is building a respected law practice. The family represents everything solid and respectable about heartland America. Exactly the kind of stability that's about to be tested when Charlie turns 5 years old and the stock market crashes, launching the nation into the Great Depression. When the Wall Street crash happens in 1929, Charlie is 5 years old, and Omaha is experiencing the full severity of the economic collapse. So here's what makes Charlie's story so remarkable. As Charlie recalls in his latter years, I'm one of the very few people that's still alive who deeply remembers the Great Depression, and that's been very helpful to me. It was so extreme that people who were not there just have no idea what the hell it was like. There was just nobody that had any money. So picture this through a 5-year-old's eyes. Young Charlie is watching homeless people roaming the streets looking for handouts, people willing to sweep a porch in exchange for a sandwich, entire families destroyed by forces that they couldn't control or even understand. But here's where it gets really interesting. What does Charlie want, even as a child? He wants to understand how the world really works. He's naturally curious, spending Christmas nights reading through entire books his parents give him, always asking why some people weather crises while others crumble. But more than that, he wants to master the game of exchange and negotiation. So by the time he turns 7, This kid is raising hamsters and exchanging them with neighborhood children, usually getting the outcomes he wants. These are some of the formative moments in what will become a lifelong skill of structuring win-win transactions. But it's not just intellectual curiosity driving him. Despite the family's relative privilege, the depression creates genuine fear in their household. Charlie sees his extended family facing real financial distress. But here's where it gets serious. His Uncle Tom's bank in Nebraska is massively exposed to farms that are failing because drought-damaged crops are causing them to default on their loans. Tom has accumulated $35,000 in uncollectible notes, which is a fortune during the Great Depression, and the bank faces closure. You got to understand that Charlie is watching as respected institutions collapse around them. He witnesses firsthand how quickly security can evaporate and how economic forces can destroy decades of careful building. Yet he also observes something else, how his grandfather, Judge Munger, responds to crisis not with panic, but with calculated action that's going to support his family. So here's where Charlie's real education begins. Judge Munger makes a decision that will profoundly shape his grandson's understanding of capital allocation and crisis management. So Charlie's grandfather risks nearly half of his personal assets by exchanging mortgages for Uncle Tom's weak bank loans, essentially using his own balance sheet to shore up the failing institution. This allows Tom to reopen the bank after Roosevelt's bank holiday, preventing total family financial collapse. But Judge Munger doesn't stop there. He identifies other family members in distress and helps them out. When Charlie's aunt's husband, a musician, loses income, Judge Munger sends him to a pharmacy school and helps him purchase a well-located pharmacy that had closed during the Depression. The business prospers, securing that branch of the family's financial future. So can you imagine what Charlie is absorbing here? These are lessons that are never going to appear in any business school curriculum. He's learning firsthand that capital properly deployed can save entire networks of people. He's seeing how someone with resources and clear thinking can turn crisis into opportunity, not for himself, but for his entire family. But most importantly here, he's understanding that wealth is not just about accumulation. It's about having the flexibility to act when others can't. The result is that Charlie learns by supporting each other, the Mungers weather the worst economic collapse in the nation's history. But the lesson goes so much deeper than this. Rather than creating scarcity thinking, this experience teaches him abundance thinking, that those with the resources and clear heads can create value for everyone during difficult times. This foundational experience also explains why Charlie is later going to excel at contrarian investing, why he's going to be comfortable making large capital commitments when others are fearful, and why he's going to develop such deep conviction about supporting high-quality people and institutions through temporary difficulties. These depression years are also important because they also establish Charlie's work ethic and self-reliance. Because despite his family connections, Charlie starts out counting passers-by that pays 40 cents an hour. He's learning that earning power comes from providing value that others need, a lesson that's going to serve him whether he's practicing law, developing real estate, or managing investments. But Charlie's unconventional education is just beginning, because next, he's going to make a decision that would test everything he's learned about taking risks and thinking beyond conventional decisions. All right, let's move to inflection point number 2, and it's December 1941. Charlie is just 17 years old, studying maths at the University of Michigan when Pearl Harbor is attacked. Like millions of young Americans, he's faced with a choice that's going to define his generation: continue with normal life or serve his country in its moment of greatest need. And for Charlie, that's not a real choice at all. So despite being on this traditional academic path, he makes a decision that's going to reveal his true character. In early 1943, just days after his 19th birthday, Charlie drops out of university to enlist in the US Army Air Corps. And keep in mind, this isn't just youthful patriotism. This is the first major example of Charlie choosing the more difficult path when he believes it's the right one, regardless of what other people's expectations are or the immediate sacrifices that come with it. What Charlie wants is to prove himself intellectually and serve meaningfully during the war effort. So even as a teenager, Charlie's developing confidence in his ability to think his way through problems that stump others. And the Army quickly recognized this about Charlie. His performance on the Army General Classification Test is so outstanding that he's ordered to study meteorology at Caltech. Now, this might not sound very glamorous, but this is highly specialized because it's forecasting flight conditions that are ultimately going to ensure the pilot's safety. And this is work that requires both analytical rigor and real-time decision-making under pressure. And these are the skills that are going to prove invaluable in his investment career, by the way. But here's when Charlie faces a significant challenge. When the war ends and he wants to pursue law school, but he doesn't have an undergraduate degree. Because remember, he left Michigan to serve in the military. Harvard Law School, like most elite institutions, require a bachelor's degree for admission. For most people, this would be an obstacle that would seem insurmountable. How do you get into one of the world's most prestigious grad programs without meeting the basic educational requirements? Lesser minds might have returned to Michigan to complete their undergrad work, adding years to their timeline and following that conventional path. But Charlie sees this as a problem to be solved. He's betting that his raw capabilities can overcome these requirements if properly applied. And here's where Charlie's approach to problem solving becomes crystal clear. Rather than simply accept that applying simply isn't worth his time, he treats it as a negotiation. So he applies to Harvard Law School without an undergraduate degree, making the case that his military service, specialized technical training, and demonstrated intellectual capabilities should substitute for these traditional credentials. So think about the confidence that requires. Charlie has to present himself not as someone lacking requirements, but as someone who has had even better preparation through non-traditional means. He's essentially saying that your intellectual capabilities do not require following these prescribed paths, that capable minds can achieve the same results through different means. And the strategy works brilliantly. Harvard admits Charlie to law school without an undergrad degree, and they recognize that his combination of military service, his technical training, and his raw abilities is preparation equal to or even better than what the traditional undergrads have done. And it gets better, though, because Charlie doesn't just succeed at Harvard, he excels because he graduates magna cum laude with his JD in 1948. So this isn't someone who barely squeaks in to gain admission despite lacking these credentials. It's someone that demonstrates that his non-traditional path actually provides better preparation for rigorous intellectual work. More importantly, this moment establishes a pattern that defines Charlie's approach to business and investing. He's learning that raw determination, properly applied, can overcome almost any obstacle that seemed insurmountable to others. This experience also shapes Charlie's lifelong commitment to this idea of multidisciplinary learning. And I can tell you, from both a founder's and an investor's perspective, this is no joke. Some of the most talented people that you see are those that come not just from these multidisciplinary backgrounds, but embrace it to see patterns that most others just can't. So going back to Charlie, after graduation, he moves to California and joins a law firm and begins his legal career that seems successful. But the real success isn't the law practice. It's the confidence he's developed in his abilities that are going to create opportunities regardless of what the traditional paths or credentials would suggest. The young man who convinces Harvard to waive its degree requirements was learning that the most valuable opportunities often exist precisely where conventional wisdom says they can't. As important as that is that these experiences also establishes Charlie's comfort with high-stakes decision-making under pressure, whether it's forecasting weather conditions that are going to determine the pilot's safety during World War II battles, or arguing complex legal cases that are going to define people's lives. He's developing the kind of calm approach under stress that will later become invaluable during market crises and high-stakes negotiations. But all this compared to what Charlie's about to experience, it's nothing. Because Charlie's life is about to experience a series of blows that would have destroyed most people. But somehow, they forge him into one of the most resilient and successful minds of his generation. Okay, inflection point number 3 now, and we're fast forwarding to 1953. Charlie is 29, he's a rising lawyer in LA, and he's married with 3 young kids. On paper, he's living the American dream, but behind closed doors, everything's unraveling. First, there's the divorce. After 8 years of marriage, Charlie and Nancy split. He loses the house and he moves into this Spartan apartment. But it's about to get so much worse. In 1954, his 8-year-old son Teddy is diagnosed with leukemia. Remember, this is the early 1950s. There's no modern treatment, no insurance to shoulder the bills, and a nearly 100% fatality rate. So every evening, Charlie is spending nights in the hospital, cradling Teddy, then walking the Pasadena streets in tears. It's a moment that would have broken most people, but not Charlie, because instead of succumbing to despair, he makes a radical choice. He's going to treat this catastrophe as something that he can grow from. So first, he throws himself back into work. He keeps his law practice going while caring for his two other children, and he's putting in marathon hours. No grand gestures, just steady, relentless effort to rebuild his finances. And looking deeper into what's going on here, Charlie develops what he would later call his philosophy of rational response to inevitable adversity. And he adopts this mantra. He says, every misfortune in life is an opportunity to act honorably and learn something. When life throws the unimaginable at you, keeping a long-term perspective can transform these in-the-moment horrors into a foundation for your future stability. In 1955, Teddy dies aged just 9 years old. Charlie is 31, divorced, burying his son, and shattered. Most people at that point would have just walked away. But Charlie, he emerges with this immunity to catastrophe, this ability to keep making good decisions when everything falls apart. So 1 year later, 1956, Charlie marries Nancy Barry, who's not to be confused with his first wife, also named Nancy, and begins their relationship grounded in this mature and mutual respect instead of this youthful romance of his first marriage. And together, they rebuild, both emotionally and financially. The takeaway is this period of tragedy, it doesn't derail Charlie. Instead, it becomes the moment in which his character and his philosophy are battle tested. This calm thinking under pressure that helped him comfort his dying son is the same thing that's going to guide billion-dollar decisions in boardrooms across the country. And next, we're going to see specifically how he channels this resilience into building wealth through his investments, turning his intellectual horsepower into millions. So buckle up. All right, inflection point number 4. It's 1960, and Charlie has rebuilt his life and legal career. He's now 36, and he's established himself as a successful real estate attorney, and he's building a growing family. But Charlie is growing restless with practicing law. As he later explains, I had a considerable passion to be wealthy, not because I wanted Ferraris, I wanted the independence. He realizes that while law provides steady income, it doesn't create the kind of outcomes that provide genuine financial security. More importantly, he's beginning to see this skill set, it's going to be better applied for building businesses rather than just advising others on these legal technicalities. Charlie started out in real estate development because brain power and energy could magnify small amounts of capital in a huge way that was not true in the stock market. So this becomes Charlie's first major lesson in intellectual leverage. What Charlie wants is to prove that his rigor can create these extraordinary returns even with limited starting capital. He's developed this confidence in his ability to see opportunities that others miss, to structure deals that create value for everyone involved, and to manage these complex projects that require both analytical and practical skills. More specifically, Charlie wants to demonstrate that the same frameworks that make him successful as a lawyer can be applied to business development and investing. So I mentioned earlier about this concept of this latticework of mental models, or in layman's terms, drawing insights from multiple disciplines to solve these complex problems that stump specialists. The challenge here is that Charlie is not a natural entrepreneur. He's transitioning from professional service work to building a business from nothing, which I can tell you both from my own experience and from a bunch of other founders that I speak to, that is a hard transition to make. Even incredibly skilled and talented people from professional services are not natural entrepreneurs capable of building businesses from scratch. As a lawyer, Charlie's success comes from solving other people's problems for a predictable fee. As a developer and an investor, success requires taking considerable financial risk and creating value where none exists before. There's so much more of an unknown entity here. But Charlie has to start somewhere, starting with his own family's needs. So he and his wife buy this property in 1960. They demolish it, sell part of it as a new lot, and they build a house for their family on the remainder. And the success of this project repeats itself with larger opportunities. And eventually, Charlie starts attracting people to join him. Eventually, Charlie starts working with this guy called Otis Booth, whose grandfather owns property near Caltech, where Charlie had studied meteorology. And when Booth's father wants to sell that property, Charlie advises building apartments instead, because he recognizes that LA's explosive growth is creating this unprecedented demand for housing. So Charlie puts his own money into it. He puts in $100,000, which is a substantial commitment for someone who's still rebuilding financially. The project eventually generates $500,000 on that $100,000 investment, a 400% return that validates Charlie's approach to identifying opportunities. And in tandem with this, Charlie is applying these same frameworks to investment management, because in the 60s, he also partners with someone called Jack Wheeler to form an investment partnership. And in 13 years, Charlie's partnership with Wheeler generates compounded annual returns of 20% relative to just 5% for the Dow Jones. So you can start to see how Charlie's learning to identify businesses trading below their intrinsic value and to understand the difference between what's a temporary setback and what's a permanent impairment. And in the 70s, when Charlie eventually closes the partnership, he's demonstrated something remarkable, that his decision-making, properly applied, can create extraordinary returns with even modest starting resources. This is why he's such an iconic mind in the industry, because even with minimal starting resources, he's able to create a philosophy that makes the established players look amateur. And over time, the success of these investments have allowed Charlie to turn his life around from a struggling divorce lawyer into a wealthy business owner. But the real value is not financial, it's educational, because Charlie is developing confidence that his frameworks can be scaled to much, much larger opportunities. So when he meets Warren Buffett and they begin this legendary partnership, Charlie already has a proven track record of value creation. More importantly, this investment partnership with Wheeler also establishes Charlie's comfort with what others perceive as high-risk investing, because Charlie's style is to concentrate his investments into a few carefully selected opportunities and to hold positions for extended periods despite what the market does, and to make these large capital commitments when he has genuine conviction. And it all stems from these lessons learned from this formative period. And I think this is really important because even the VCs and PE firms that consciously don't even think about Charlie Munger when they think about their investment strategy are implicitly and indirectly standing on Charlie's shoulders because he's shown that this style generates extraordinary outcomes. All right, final inflection point now. We're in the 70s, and Charlie and Warren have been friends for over a decade, ever since meeting at a dinner party in Omaha in 1959. And both of these guys are hugely successful in their respective spheres. Warren's building a reputation as a brilliant value investor that's focused on bargains, while Charlie has proven his capability in real estate and his investment partnership. And the two of them share the same intellectual interests. They have similar senses of humor, and they even share the fact that they both worked in Warren's grandfather's grocery store, albeit at different times. But their approaches to investing still differ massively. So you're beginning to see the setup here. These two co-founders of Berkshire, despite having massive intellectual respect to each other, have incredibly different approaches to how they do their work. On the one hand, you have Buffett, who's a disciple of his mentor Ben Graham, and his philosophy is all about buying companies at prices well below these statistical measures of value. This is what he calls cigar butt investing, which is picking up these companies cheap enough that you can get one good puff as they generate a decent time over the short term, even if the underlying business is mediocre. And on the other hand, you've got Charlie, who's influenced by his time in real estate, and he believes that these high quality businesses, when held for long periods, that's what generates better returns, even more so than the philosophy of the supposed goat of value investing, Warren Buffett. I mean, keep in mind, that takes a lot of courage to stand up to someone who's that respected in the industry. And it's something that most co-founders, even those that have a huge amount of mutual respect for each other, really struggle with in the moment. And the test case for how they're going to balance these two philosophies, it comes when Blue Chip Stamps, a company in which both Buffett and Charlie have investments, is considering the acquisition of a company called See's Candies, a California-based chocolate company founded in 1921, the same company that we talked about at the beginning of this episode. The numbers don't look particularly attractive by Buffett's traditional standards. See's is asking for $30 million for a company with around $25 million in annual sales and $4 million in profits. This represents nearly 3 times book value, which is far more expensive than Buffett typically pays for any business. And what Charlie wants to prove is this emerging philosophy of his can generate superior long-term returns. Now, keep in mind, Charlie's philosophy on this is not affected by the same stuff that Buffett's is. Charlie is so high conviction on this because of his track record in well-located, well-managed properties and how they generate returns far exceeding their initial attractiveness on paper. So Charlie sees this decision, please excuse that terrible pun, as an opportunity to influence Warren in ways that could benefit both of them for decades. But again, Charlie is dealing with someone who's at the top of his game. He's got a philosophy that's worked for him and that has allowed him to be the most successful investor of his time. What Charlie sees as attractive, Warren sees as an expensive company by traditional value investing standards. It's not a rapidly growing business. The market for boxed chocolates is a mature one, or at least seems so, and it's regional rather than expandable. So by Warren's traditional criteria, this looks exactly like the kind of investment that sophisticated value investors should never look at. So Charlie faces the challenge of convincing his more experienced and more successful partner to pay what seems like a premium for a business that doesn't fit established value investing criteria. So the two of them are going back and forth over this, and this is when Charlie really starts to articulate these qualitative factors that are harder to quantify, but are potentially more valuable to understanding what makes a good business. And here's the moment where Charlie demonstrates the kind of thinking that's going to make him invaluable to Berkshire over the next 5 decades. Rather than suggesting that traditional value investing criteria doesn't matter, Charlie argues that they're incomplete. And that, by the way, is a phenomenal way of navigating a situation with a co-founder where you do not see eye to eye on paper. And I'll just say that again. So rather than arguing that one way is better than the other, Charlie argues that Warren's way is incomplete and that it only captures part of what makes a business truly valuable over long periods. So taking a step back here, what he's doing is, out of the greatest respect for Warren, he's not trying to undermine him. He's acknowledging the merits in Warren's approach, but he's just saying they're incomplete. And he's expanding on that and is explaining his philosophy in a way that is compatible with Warren's belief in order to move him to how he thinks about things. Charlie's argument focuses on what he recognized as C's intangible asset, which is brand loyalty that has been building for over 50 years. And what Charlie sees is that these customers, they're not just buying chocolates, they're buying tradition, emotion, and a piece of California's culture. And it's this loyalty which creates what Charlie recognizes as pricing power, the ability to raise prices without losing customers, which translates into steadily increasing profits without proportional increases in capital investment, or for the finance nerds out there, high return on invested capital. So you can see that Charlie understands that brand equity, while difficult to measure statistically, could be more valuable than traditional assets like factories or inventory because it provides significant competitive advantages that cannot be easily replicated by a competitor. So Charlie pushes Buffett to see the bigger picture. He says, look past the raw financials and focus on what really matters, which is C's ability to generate cash flow over the long haul. He's arguing for a framework that considers not just these statistical measures, but the long-term cash generation potential, which is based on this mix of qualitative and quantitative indicators. You know, for people listening to this doesn't exactly sound like rocket science. It sounds like common sense and it sounds intuitive. But this is over 50 years ago. The industry was stratospheres behind where we are now. Nobody was thinking about this stuff. Computers weren't around. Buffett was finding these Moody's annuals and flicking through page after page after page, looking at data, trying to find statistical bargains at the time. So this is a paradigm shift for what the style of investing was back then, and is an enormous step out of Warren's comfort zone. And it's this conversation that reveals the formative basis about how Berkshire think about quality businesses, that companies with strong competitive advantages or moats, as Buffett later called them, can generate superior returns even when purchased at prices that seem expensive by traditional measures. Again, while this is standard practice in today's investment community, it's so important to understand how different this style of thinking is at the time. And again, while most people listening in VC or P might not like to admit it, oh, Grandpa Charlie Munger, He's one of the figureheads that opens the door to how risk capital can be deployed into companies that aren't statistical bargains. So Charlie's analysis transforms both his partnership with Buffett and the entire field of value investing. So the outcome here is that Berkshire purchased Seas for $25 million, and the acquisition becomes one of the most profitable in the history of investing, generating over $2 billion in cumulative profits over the following decades. But the financial returns, spectacular as they are, represent only part of Sea's true value to Berkshire. And Warren talks about this directly. He says, if we hadn't bought Sea's Candies, we wouldn't have bought Coke. So thank you, Seas, for the $12 billion. Now, for anyone that's not familiar with Berkshire Hathaway, Coke is seen as the synonymous Berkshire investment of the late 20th century. So think about what Warren's really saying, which is that his biggest decisions, they come from the conversation that they had overseas Candies. And it's the single biggest decision that both Warren and Charlie point to when explaining how Berkshire turned around from a failing textiles business in the 50s into a holding company that at the time of recording is valued at over $1 trillion. As Buffett directly says, Charlie is the one that educated me about the wisdom of paying up for quality. Again, in Buffett's own words, Charlie is the one that educated me about the wisdom of paying up for quality. So it becomes clear that it was Charlie's involvement in this decision that forms the bedrock of the Berkshire way of investing and is the playbook for the investment community that survives even to this day. So looking at these 5 pivotal moments in Charlie's life, you can see a few principles emerge that explain not just his success, but how he becomes one of history's most influential business thinkers. And keep in mind, these are not like abstract concepts. They're highly usable frameworks that have been battle tested through decades of decisions under the most challenging circumstances. So first, every major inflection point in Charlie's life involves thinking calmly and objectively during periods when most people would be paralyzed by fear or emotion. Whether it's watching families destroyed during the Great Depression, convincing Harvard to waive degree requirements, or staying focused while his son is dying, Charlie consistently demonstrates what you can call an immunity to catastrophe. This ability to think clearly and make good decisions even under extreme stress. And Charlie puts this best in his own words, as we said already. He says, every misfortune in life is an opportunity to act honorably and learn something. And what is so admirable about Charlie is how he takes this huge adversity that he's experienced in his earlier years into an edge by keeping a long-term mindset when others are focused on pain and panic consuming you in the moment. And this principle is just so valuable, especially in this high density content world that we live in, that somehow manages to convince you that even if the market's down 2% on the day, that the world is on fire. And this is crucial in business because the highest returns often come from acting decisively when others are paralyzed by uncertainty. And for all the investors listening, you know that over the decades of your career, the moments that create true wealth are by acting decisively when everyone around you is losing their mind. The next common thread I see here is that throughout his career, Charlie demonstrates how mental frameworks can generate extraordinary returns even with limited capital. So super relevant for anyone that's listening, regardless of what you have available to invest. His investment partnership outperforms the market by 15 percentage points annually. And this is through better analysis. It has nothing to do with access to capital. Even the Seas Candies insight represents his intellectual leverage as he recognizes value that isn't visible when using traditional metrics. So Charlie proves that in business, as in other fields, the highest returns come from doing things differently rather than doing the same things with more resources. And Charlie later talks about this. He says the way to win is to work, 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 and hope to have a few insights. The insights matter more than the work, but both are necessary. Third, Charlie's success consistently comes from applying insights from one field to solve problems in another. So first, you've got his legal training, and this teaches him to think about evidence and logical reasoning. Then you've got his meteorology experience, which teaches him about probability forecasting under uncertainty. Then you've got his real estate development work, and this teaches him about leverage and value creation. And his personal tragedies teach him about keeping a long-term perspective and staying resilient under pressure. And this approach becomes central to Berkshire's own moat because most investors are so static and narrow in how they think about investments, which is in pure, isolated, stringent financial terms, while Charlie is considering the psychological, the strategic, and the operational factors. They often matter more. Fourth, every major success in Charlie's career involves collaborating effectively with other people. So think back to that very first story we talked about when Charlie was just 5 years old. Think about how his grandfather responded in the Depression. By working together, he was able to support entire networks of people. Then fast forward to when he's building his investment partnerships with Otis Booth and Jack Wheeler, and they succeed from bringing these complementary skill sets together. And of course, his collaboration with the GOAT himself, Warren, that creates value that neither could have achieved on their own. So Charlie understands that this extraordinary success almost never comes from individual brilliance alone, which is quite a feat considering that he had every reason to be arrogant and overconfident with his achievements growing up. But instead, his success comes from building relationships based on aligned interest. That is something that's so important both for founders and investors listening to this. And the fifth, the last thread I see here, and it's perhaps Charlie's most distinctive characteristic, is his comfort with concentration and extended periods of apparent inactivity. Whether it's choosing his investments, his partnerships, or his major life decision, he makes a handful of high conviction choices rather than diversifying into a lot of mediocre ones. This approach requires a tremendous amount of patience and discipline, one that the greatest investors know all too well. In Charlie's own words, the way that we think about making rational decisions at Berkshire, we look for 1-foot fences with big rewards on the other side. Rather than trying to jump over 10-foot fences, Charlie focuses on finding easy problems that generate disproportionate returns. So thinking about these themes all together, what unifies all these principles is Charlie's approach to compounding, not just financial compounding, but intellectual compounding, relationship compounding, and reputational compounding. Every decision is evaluated not just for the immediate term, but for how it positions him for the long term. So think about a few examples here. His Harvard law experience creates this credibility that opens doors decades later. Then you have how he responds to personal tragedies and how that builds this deep emotional resilience that proves invaluable during business crises. Then you have his success in real estate, which provides the capital and the confidence for these larger investment opportunities. And then when he teams up with Buffett, for creating this platform for deploying these frameworks at unprecedented scale. Charlie proves that extraordinary success comes not from avoiding failure, but from clarity of mind that converts these inevitable setbacks into your biggest edge. And in my opinion, this approach to compounding explains why Charlie's influence extends far beyond his personal success. The frameworks he develops through these pivotal moments to this day are the foundation for value investing. And despite Charlie's recent passing, his ideas still hold tremendous power over the smartest minds in the investment and business community who continue to apply his frameworks to their own decisions. As we take a step back from these 5 pivotal moments, what emerges is a masterclass in how extraordinary success really happens. Charlie's journey from just a 5-year-old boy watching his grandfather save the family during the Great Depression to the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, it's not about avoiding failure or following these prescribed paths. It's about developing these frameworks for converting the inevitable adversity that you're going to face in your life, in your business, into your biggest advantage. And these lessons here, they are as profound as they are practical. So here's what I want you to take away from this conversation. When you're facing your next major challenge, ask yourself, how can I keep a long-term perspective when everyone else can't see past the noise? And how can I apply insights from different fields to solve the problem I'm dealing with? And most importantly, how does this setback position me for future success? Charlie's approach to crises, to learning, to partnership, and decision-making proves that the highest returns in business and life come not from avoiding these difficulties, but from converting this hardship to your advantage. Whether you're building a business, managing investments, or simply just trying to make better decisions under pressure, Charlie's principles give you a proven template for turning these challenges into extraordinary success. The 31-year-old man who once walked the streets of Pasadena crying while his 9-year-old son died went on to create hundreds of billions of dollars for the people who believed in him and influenced thousands of business leaders worldwide. That transformation doesn't happen despite adversity. It happens directly because of how he dealt with it. And in the world that we live in, that glamorizes these overnight success stories, Charlie's story reminds us that the most valuable achievements come from patient application of proven principles over extended periods. These frameworks that he's developed are available to anyone willing to think clearly, act decisively, and maintain this long-term perspective, even when the immediate results seem discouraging. And as a last bit of closing wisdom to leave you with, I'll refer directly to Charlie's own advice. Spend each day trying to be a little wiser than you were when you woke up. The compounding effect of daily wisdom, properly applied, creates results that seem impossible to those following these conventional approaches. That's the real lesson of Charlie's remarkable life and the foundation for building your own extraordinary success. Thank you for joining us on Inflection Moments. If today's story sparked a new perspective or challenged your thinking, be sure to share it with someone you know loves this stuff as much as you and I do. Maybe it's a college buddy, your water cooler buddy, or maybe even someone in the family group chat. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to our channels so you can be the first one to hear what we've got coming next. And if you're interested in insights, ideas, and lessons from some of the world's greatest entrepreneurs, sign up for our newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep building and talk soon.